When it comes to gaming urban legends, some of the most infamous ones hail from the Pokemon series. Some are true, such as the mysterious missing note found on the coast of Cinnabar Island, or the creepy ghost girl in Pokemon X and Y. On the other hand, a huge amount of these rumors are untrue. The Moss Deep Space Center allowing the player to travel to the moon and encounter a Jirachi, Mew being hidden underneath the truck, and God forbid I discuss Lavender Town Syndrome. The reasons that these fake rumors exist and spread as far as they did is pretty easy to pinpoint. Now, the MO can vary, anywhere from conjuring fake methods to capture event-only Pokemon to screw with early forum crawlers, or to shock internet goers and fit in with the creepypasta trend of the early 2010s. Hell, some people even went out of their way to make fake Pokemon, each with their own outrageously difficult capture methods, to make themselves look like the biggest badass on the playground. Yes, Ronnie, we get it, you caught Venogod or whatever the hell, congratulations, here's a gold star. Now if you'll excuse me and your mom have a mattress to break it. These fake little bastards have since been dubbed the Pokegods. And while the subject is deserving of an entire video dedicated to it and it alone, I'd be remiss not to mention it here. Each of these rumors have something to do with the game itself, and thanks to the advent of modern technology, are pretty easily disproven through processes like data mining. Or, just playing the fucking game. However, there exists a Pokemon rumor that's more pervasive than anything I've ever seen. It has zero attachment to any game data, and as a result it can't really be easily disproven. Instead, this rumor has to do with the game's development. Of course, I'm talking about the infamous fun fact that Arcanine was supposed to be a legendary Pokemon alongside Articuno and Zapdos, before being replaced by Moltres incredibly late into the game's development. This is a fact I've seen many people share, and ever since I heard it for the first time in middle school, I've always wondered if it's even true. Well, before I go about discussing whether or not there's any truth to this legend, let's take a look at the details. The rumor alleges that Arcanine was originally designed to be the third member of the Kanto legendary trio, the other two being Articuno and Zapdos. Somewhere in development, the team thought it was weird to have two birds and one dog, so they reduced Arcanine to a lesser role and designed Moltres to complete the trio. A few years later, when Pokemon Gold and Silver began development, they looked towards Arcanine's status as a scrapped legendary and decided to create the legendary beasts, Entei, Raikou, and Suicune, to finally bring this scrapped idea to fruition. There are several pieces of evidence that seemingly support this theory, such as Arcanine having unusually high base stat totals when compared to other Kanto Pokemon, its species in the Pokédex being listed as the legendary Pokemon, and most damningly, in the Pokemon anime's second episode, Pokemon Emergency, Arcanine appears on an ancient engraving held within a Pokemon Center. Alongside Arcanine, the legendary birds are also shown on the carving, which seemingly suggests a connection between these Pokemon. These are all pretty convincing, I'll admit, especially the ancient carving. However, taking a look at how the Pokemon games were developed, more specifically, into how and when Pokemon were designed and implemented, puts this theory into question. If you've seen my Missing No video, you should already be kinda familiar with how the internal index list for Pokemon works. Beyond the Pokédex number, internally in the game's code, each Pokemon has a specific index number used to identify which Pokemon is which. And more importantly, it provides a rough timeline for which Pokemon were added and designed in relation to one another. This isn't 100% confirmed per se, but there would have to be some crazy coincidences if this wasn't the case. For instance, Rhydon is the first character ever designed as a Pokemon. Even though Diglett technically does predate it due to being a frequent childhood drawing of Game Freak employee, Shigeki Morimoto, it wasn't designed as a Pokemon initially, so it doesn't count. Anyways, evidence of Rhydon being the first Pokemon designed is incredibly prevalent throughout the games, such as the statues throughout the series being made in its image, but it's also prevalent throughout design documents where Rhydon appears incredibly frequently. Hell, he was even originally planned to be the first Pokemon players see upon booting the game up, evident by this early title screen graphic. As for such, in the game's code, Rhydon occupies index slot number 1, which matches up with the notion that he was the first Pokemon ever truly designed. So with this in mind, if Arcanine was originally designed to be a third cornerstone of the legendary trio, then shouldn't he be located near Articuno and Zapdos if we're sorting by index number? Well, as you can probably guess, since I'm mentioning it, this is not the case, as Arcanine appears incredibly early in the list, occupying slot number 20, whereas Articuno and Zapdos occupy slots 74 and 75, with spot 73 being claimed by none other than Moltres. Now, you might be thinking that I should just end the video here. This is a pretty cut and dry explanation that this just isn't the case. But there is a massive problem with this argument. Upon further inspection, it's clear that trying to use the index numbers as some sort of representation of relationships between Pokemon is an incredibly ill-informed claim. This is a massive point to my detriment here, that the way the index list is organized makes no sense whatsoever. Now, towards the end it makes sense, as the Pokemon are suddenly organized by evolutionary progression. For instance, Eevee's immediately followed by Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon. Weedle is immediately followed by Kakuna and Beedrill. Ponyta's followed by Rapidash, etc. However, the beginning of the list is all sorts of nonsense. A Pokemon like Clefairy can occupy index slot number 4, meanwhile its evolution Clefable occupies slot 142. The index list is a giant mystery that hasn't really been explained all too much. So that begs the question, how can we know for sure what the index number is representative of? I know I said it was incredibly likely that the index numbers were representative of when Pokemon were designed in relation to one another, but in this instance, incredibly likely isn't good enough. I need a smoking gun here, and luckily that smoking gun exists, but unfortunately it entirely unravels the narrative I wove. The smoking gun is seen through the first mythical Pokemon ever, the incredibly infamous Mew. Mew is in an incredibly unique set of circumstances where we know exactly when he was added to the game, and how we should expect it to appear in the index list if my assumption, that a Pokemon's index number is directly related to when it was designed, is correct. Mew was an incredibly late addition to Pokemon Red and Blue's code. It was actually done as a prank by Shigeki Morimoto. The idea behind its implementation was Morimoto's desire to fulfill an idea of Pokemon creator, Satoshi Tajiri. He had an idea for an elusive Pokemon that would have rumors of its existence spiral, basing the idea off rumors he heard about arcade games like Xevious and Space Invaders. Interestingly, Mew was the first Pokemon to have a trademark applied for in May 1990, and the first registered in March 1994. Despite this, from what I can tell, Mew was never actually planned to appear in the first generation of Pokemon games. However, he was always planned to appear in other forms of Pokemon media, such as the anime and TCG, likely to further build upon his mystique. With the knowledge of him being the last Pokemon added to the game, he should be the final Pokemon on the index list, right? Well, he's not. The final Pokemon to appear on the index list is fucking Victory Bell of all things. Meanwhile, Mew occupies index slot 21, which based on this design document showing early designs for many Pokemon, ironically enough including Arcanine, we can see that index spot 21 was never meant for Mew. Rather, index number 21 originally belonged to the scrapped Pokemon, Omega. This is incredibly problematic, since this essentially means that the index list is useless in terms of identifying who was designed when, as they could evidently move Pokemon around to occupy different index numbers as they pleased for, whatever reason they'd like. This single instance doesn't necessarily disprove the general idea that the index list provides a rough idea of when each Pokemon was designed though. Mew, due to his unique circumstances, was likely an exception in not how they handled Pokemon implementation across the board. However, this sows enough doubt in my mind to where I can't say with 100% confidence that this piece of evidence alone disproves the notion that Arcanine was intended to be a legendary Pokemon. That was never my intention though, as Arcanine's case as potentially being designed as a legendary Pokemon was never really easily disproven by one incredibly strong argument. Rather, it's a death of a million paper cuts. I want to start by discussing what I feel is the most ridiculous point people use to support this theory, his base stat total. Now, I will be the first to admit, Arcanine does have a suspiciously high BST, sitting at a whopping 555. Many people have speculated that this is a remnant from when he was a legendary. Now, this sounds like a convincing argument on paper, until you sit down and recognize the fact that, much like pretty much everything else from Generation 1, the stat totals for Pokemon make no damn sense. Each of the final stages for the starter Pokemon of this generation have varying stats, when one would expect that they'd be equal so that one isn't slightly stronger than the other. Ninetales, who's Arcanine's counterpart, is significantly weaker based on base stat total alone, sitting at a measly 505. Executor, who's similar to Arcanine, was designed incredibly early into the game's development, has a similarly high base stat total, sitting at 530. So please, tell me with a straight face that this dumbass palm tree was also supposed to be a legendary. Arcanine isn't even unique in having an unusually high base stat total as a non-legendary or non-pseudo-legendary Pokemon. Banette and Ursaluna both also have the same base stat total of 555. So are we supposed to just assume that they were also gonna be legendaries? Looking at a base stat total isn't representative of any rules that Game Freak themselves follow. They fluctuate so wildly across the entire series, let alone in Gen 1. Trying to look at these numbers in a generation filled with odd stat distributions and make assumptions based on them is just dumb! Beyond the base stat total debacle, the single most infamous piece of evidence comes from this weird mural in the anime, where Arcanine appears alongside the legendary birds. This damn thing is pretty much the sole reason this theory exists, so I would like to draw attention towards it for the next few minutes, and this mural is a pain in my ass! Since people have pointed towards it as being a piece of evidence supporting this supposed fun fact, but its overall importance has been vastly overblown. Tell me now, folks, if Arcanine was replaced by Moltres, then why exactly does Moltres appear alongside him here? Many people have pointed out, oh, you know, the Firebird at the top could be Ho-Oh, but that's nonsense, don't lie to yourself. This is clearly Moltres, evident by the signature tail and wings made of fire, a trait that Ho-Oh is missing! In fact, of the Generation 1 birds, Articuno bears the strongest physical resemblance to Ho-Oh due to their similar tail feathers and crests. This is an opinion clearly mirrored by the show's production team, as in the episode, Ash mistakenly says that he saw Articuno when we all know that he saw Ho-Oh.
But I did see a flying Pokemon like that one. It flew right over the rainbow.
Man, shut your bitch ass up!
Then this begs the huge question, why the hell is Arcanine here to begin with? Well, I believe it has to do with the fact that the show's producers needed a fourth Pokemon to create a square-shaped set of tiles to most effectively fill the screen. If they only used the 3 birds, they wouldn't be able to make something that most convincingly fills the screen. If you do a triangle arrangement, you'd be left with all this empty space at the top or the bottom of the screen. If they align the mural in a straight line, then you're left with significant empty space on both the tops and bottoms, as well as it now being necessary to zoom the camera out further, which would then require them to draw more of the Pokemon Center's interior. Odds are that they simply needed a fourth Pokemon here to fill space, and they went with Arcanine since whatever lore bible the producers were given likely included the fact that Arcanine's species classification is the legendary Pokemon. They probably figured that it sounded important enough to be saddled next to the 3 birds. Which, by the way, should not be used as a piece of evidence in favor of this theory. Being a legendary Pokemon is totally different than being the legendary Pokemon. Legendary Pokemon is a classification of Pokemon that exists primarily outside of the Pokemon universe itself. Even though we, the observers of the Pokemon universe, may classify all these similar Pokemon under the legendary Pokemon category, it's not really an idea that exists in-universe, especially at the time. It's a non-diegetic classification. Arcanine, in-universe, is legendary, as in having legends told of it. Specifically, in-game they mention it appearing in a plethora of Chinese legends, which detail it running across the lands at incredible speeds. Now, you may be asking, then why didn't they go with Mewtwo? Well, Mewtwo is a man-made Pokemon, so he's not old enough to have ancient stone carvings made of him, let alone be publicly known about at this point since Mewtwo's first appearance in the anime is much further along in the series timeline, as his first appearance isn't until the movie. And wait, just get a load of this! You know the oh-so-important Arcanine tile that I've spent the past however many minutes ranting about? Well, in the show itself, it's shown to be much less significant than the other three because it's the one that gets pulled away to reveal a fucking TV monitor for Professor Oak to FaceTime Ash and tell him that he sucks! Yeah, I can't do this anymore, man. This is just so stupid. I don't understand people's obsession with this theory. It is nothing but assumptions on how the Generation 1 games were made, and assumptions of stuff that we frankly still have very little understanding of. As long as we're ignoring the carvings, I can replace Arcanine with literally any other suspiciously strong Pokemon from the first generation games, and we'd end up with essentially the same argument. Was Lapras supposed to be a legendary Pokemon? Was Snorlax supposed to be a legendary Pokemon? Hell, was Exeggutor supposed to be a legendary Pokemon? I can just as easily sit here and make theories that make as much sense as the Arcanine one to account for these three Pokemon being in the exact same hypothetical situation. There is simply not enough evidence to suggest that Arcanine was ever supposed to be a legendary Pokemon. And while we certainly don't have enough insight on the game's development to outright say he never was, I don't need to present any evidence for that idea since it's already the status quo. He looks like a normal Pokemon, he's been treated like a normal Pokemon, and we've been shown time and time again that he is just a normal Pokemon. Aside from his appearance on the carving in the anime, nothing we know about his creation or the series development suggests that he was supposed to be a legendary. There are no primary sources for this claim. Every single piece of evidence supporting this idea are the exact same trite assumptions. Now, if a developer came forward and said, yeah, I think Arcanine was supposed to be a legendary, then this would be an entirely different video. But every single piece of evidence we have is just an assumption. While I think the idea of Arcanine being designed as a legendary Pokemon is incredibly interesting, there is zero substantial evidence supporting this idea. Until more information shows up supporting the theory, this claim has the same amount of factual basis as to claim that I alone am responsible for the Big Bang. My opinion, however, isn't the only one. You know, opinions are like family members you hate. Everyone's got one, so let me know how you feel about this in the comment section down below. Are you an Arcanine truther who believes that Arcanine was designed to be a legendary, and that there was some massive piece of evidence I missed? Or are you like me and an Arcanine denier, never seeing the weight of the theory's evidence? I encourage discussion in all of my videos, but this is one where I especially want a conversation to be had. So please leave your thoughts down below. I am genuinely curious as to what the consensus is on this theory. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing if you want to see more from me in the future. And if you didn't like the video, please let me know what I can do to improve in my stuff moving forward. Anyways, I'll be seeing you guys next time. Later.